I've been making these videos and PowerPoints with audio all week, and I still can't get used to seeing myself or hearing myself. It's weird, but I'm trying to get used to it. Well, good evening, everybody. I hope everybody had a good weekend, and I apologize for not getting on last night, but the boys and I spent some good quality time playing some games. And what did we watch? We watched a movie, and goofed around and did some other stuff, but it was good to spend a good solid night, and I'm glad to be back here tonight with you guys. So when we left off on Friday, the committee had mustered the militia, and our main character, Adam, had signed up to fight. His father seems very proud of him. However, there was an argument among the militia as to what they should do, and that's kind of where we left off. Sam Adams and John Hancock had showed up to the town, and the Reverend had sent them away. And there's really a debate going on as to whether or not they should use a true military force or military might to kind of stop this, or whether to really kind of talk it out. So Moses Cooper, our father in our book, has been arguing with some of the committeemen, and specifically the Reverend, and that's where we're picking up. So let's read a little bit of April Morning. I'd hardly call that a compromise, said Simon Casper, who had joined the group. Why not one from the militia and one from the committee? Since he was a Concord man, it seemed to me that he was being a little pushy and perhaps felt that he ought to be the spokesman for everyone. He was not a likable man. He made me nervous, and I think he made others nervous as well. But finally, they all settled on the Reverend. For one thing, he was unarmed, and would thus be in himself a physical proposal for peaceful exchange. He would talk for the committee, the town, and the militia. Since his congregation included practically everybody, I must say that I didn't envy him, having to stand out in front with no gun or way of defending himself, but he appeared to be relieved at the suggestion. There's only one thing that troubles me somewhat, the Reverend said. Suppose they see us out there, but just decide to ignore us and march on past us up the road. After all, it's plain enough from all I hear, and they're interested in Concord, where the stores are. Well, what then? By God, then we'll stop them, Simon Casper declared. Oh, man, use the brains God gave you, my father said, and Casper bristled and said he was sick and tired of listening to Moses Cooper's insults. When the day comes that plain discussion is characterized as insult, I'll move out of New England, father snapped. I'm only trying to make the point that there, exists a certain disparity in the size of the forces concerned. The plain truth of the matter is that we can't stop them. What do you want, sir? A bloodbath? Jonas Parker agreed. Moses is right, Simon. My feeling is that we take up our positions here, we hold them with dignity and courage. If they propose to march on past us, why, then they march on past. Of all the damn things, most of the militiamen were listening to the discussion now, and half a dozen side arguments broke out. Father shouted in silence. I'm sorry. Father shouted for silence. Let's hear from the Reverend, he said. On the outskirts of the huddle, Jonathan Harrington, Caleb Harrington's 17-year-old son, began to play the Redcoat bangle on his fife. Jonathan, shut that pipe off, his father shouted at him. The Reverend raised his arms, and when he got a little bit of order, he said to us, It seems to me that we haven't as many choices as some of us imagine. We are not here by choice, but because our conscience dictates that we assert our primacy in the place of our homes and birth. We are not soldiers, and we few in numbers, so I think we can end any discussion of fighting the British Army, regardless of the ethic involved. However, we do have a role to perform, and we must see it through. In Boston, where we all of us have brother and sister, mother and father, aunt and uncle, and 100 kin, ties of blood and friendship, the British have seen fit to wipe out every vestige of freedom. They have taken quarters as they see fit. They imprison this one and that one as they please. They have shot down innocent men in cold blood. The streets are filled with drunken bullies in red coats, and there remains only a memory of what the city once was. It is not our choice, but our necessity to prevent the same thing from happening here in the countryside. We are drawn up here for that purpose. Here we stand with our arms in hand, but with no belligerence in our hearts. I do not think the British will pass by us. They have too much false pride for that. They will demand to know what the purpose we have gathered here. And someone must tell them. If you wish me to serve that purpose, I will try to compose my thoughts in whatever time is left to us, and then state our purpose and integrity simply and directly, if you wish I do so. So what he's talking about is he's talking about how the Redcoats have really taken over the street of Boston, how the Redcoats have shot people down in cold blood. Well, he's talking about the Boston Massacre, right? People come together to petition the to petition the colonial governor, and they are shot down March 5th, right, 1775. And he's talking about the Quartering Act. The British soldiers can knock on your door and say, "Hey, you need to give me a place to live. You need to give me food." And as a redcoat, and the Quartering Act says that as a redcoat, they can demand that. So the Reverend now is saying, "I will talk for us if that's what you want." And he's pretty sure that the British are not going to just simply pass them by. I'm going to get a sip of ginger ale out of my Viking glass and read on. I thought that it was beautifully put. I was cold and tired and hungry. Still, I admired that the Reverend, under such circumstances, could do near as well as he'd done in church Sunday past. You must remember that he took off Friday and Saturday to prepare a Sunday sermon. And here was this, right off the top of his mind in the pitch black of night. I suppose that father could have bettered it, being used to throwing in an argument at the drop of a hat. But for some reflective man like the Reverend, it was all one could ask. I even began to look forward to his projected exchange with the British, and to imagine some of the things I might say in his place. Just for the sake of peace, I hoped that his thoughts ran to less colorful language than mine. When he finished, the applause came from all around, and it was plain that he had the sentiment with him. I can't express how relieved I felt. There is nothing that lessens one's warlike ardor more than a few hours in the wet and cold of the night. And with the reassurance of the Reverend that this would be no more than a polite and skillful exchange of words and principles, I began to anticipate the finish of it and work up a certain amount of indignation at whatever was holding up the arrival of the British. In truth, I must admit that one of the things I felt I simply could not face was the possibility of being left out of whatever would happen. I could imagine the other boys talking about it and building up their own personal deeds, the way boys do, and strutting in front of the girls, and thought that I might be out of all this was just heartbreaking. But now it would be all right. I would have my cake and eat it, so as to speak. A number of the women and some of the younger boys had drifted out onto the common. Jonas Parker and Simon Casper told them in no certain terms that they were to go home and stay out of the way. Then Jonas Parker yelled for the militia to fall into parade order and dress up. I had drilled with them enough to know what to do and found myself in a place next to Abel Loring in the second rank. Aside from Parker, Casper, Father, and the Reverend, 66 men had turned up for the muster, even though here had been some argument as to the actual number. I know this for a fact because once we were in rank, Parker had us count off, and the count came to exactly 66. With the 4 men in front of the rank, there were 70 of us assembled in one common 2 lines of men, 33 in each line. At first, there was something of a scramble on where they could get a good view of everything that happened. But even the Reverend agreed that the British would get a better impression of us if they saw mature men instead of boys. And he and Parker and Father and Casper went down the ranks, moving the boys back and the men up. The one exception was Jonathan Harrington. He was 17 but small for his age, and he didn't look much more than 14 or 15. But he was a musician. The long range would have a regular corps of 4 drums and 4 fifes, and the committee at Concord had been promising us the drums for weeks. But only one drum came through. Willie Diamond carried it until his mother drove him home and into bed. Abel Loring played the fife, and so did Nathan Hamble, but Hamble was in bed with a sore throat, and Abel Loring had forgotten to bring his fife when he joined the muster. Jonathan Crisp and I pressed him to run home for it, but he was afraid that if he did, the British would turn up while he was gone, and he'd miss out all the fun. That left Jonathan Harrington as our only real musician, and he argued that there was no point in having a musician unless he played his piece where the enemy could see it. His father was there, and I could see that he wasn't pleased with the notion of his son standing in front when all the rest of us were in the back. Father didn't like the idea either, but Jonathan argued so hard and persistently that they gave way. He took his place at one end of the row, one end of the front row, just as proud as Punch. We stood facing east, and it must have been past 5 o'clock in the morning now. For when you looked at the eastern sky and then in the western sky, you could see how the one was lightning and the other was still deep charcoal, lit brightly with stars. The Reverend said to Jonathan Harrington, "Well, Jonathan, since your persistence has won your point, what can you play to ease our waiting?" "Anything you say, sir." "Would you render Old 100? "Oh, yes, sir." Jonathan grinned. We all of us smiled a little when the Reverend mentioned Old 100, just as we would have been disappointed if he hadn't. It was his favorite hymn. He still had it in his house. I had seen it once, the original parchment sheet that his folks had brought over from old Amsterdam 150 years ago, and which was supposed to have been hand-lettered by Henry Ainsworth, and there was almost never a Sunday when he didn't call for the singing of it. Now we took it up, all of us with full voice, so that they could hear in the houses and know how high our spirits were singing. Show to Jehovah all the earth. Serve ye Jehovah with gladness. Before him come with singing mirth. Know the Jehovah, he God is. It was strange, but after we sang the one hymn, a pall fell upon us. I know that I was thinking about Jonathan Harrington and how he had been talking of marriage with Bethy Sunderland, and I thought how terrible it would be if he would be struck down, standing as he was in the first row. And how could Bessie Sunderland feel? It was a foolish way to think. I looked at the men and boys around me, and their faces were gray and drawn, and old in the pre-dawn. The whole eastern sky was gray now. We were a part of it, and the gray lay in dew upon the grass of the common. My belly was queasy, but out of fatigue, not out of fear. I told myself that the British would not come. Had we made fools of ourselves? How did the men feel, standing here in the lines on the common with every manner of weapon, bird guns, muskets, flintlocks, matchlocks, rifle, even old blunderbuss Ephraim Drake insisted was the best weapon ever invented. Then Father and Jonas Parker walked down our line and reminded everyone to see that their flints were not on cock. They didn't want any accidents, they said. Father looked at me and smiled and nodded, and he picked up my spirit, and that picked up my spirits a good deal. I took a bit of flannel off my flint. Far in the distance, shots were fired. We heard them. The sound was like twigs snapping in the winter frost. Everyone became tense, and men leaning on their guns picked them up and held them in both hands. In the west, the dark band of night washed away. The birds began to sing around the common, the way they do in the hour before dawn. A cloud high in the sky turned pink with the first reflection of the sun, but the east, the direction of the Monotony Road, was still full of haze and mist. Then, after all the waiting, all the climax and anticlimax of the long night, the British came and dawn came. Men who were talking dropped their voices to whispers, and then the whispers stopped. And in the distance, through the morning mist, we heard the beat of the British drums. It began as a rustle. Then it was the sound of a boy running through the reeds of a dry swamp. Then it was my own sound as I ran along the picket fence with a stick. And how did I come to be here, grown, with a gun in my wet hands? Fear began. I felt it prickle on my spine. I felt it like the weight in my belly. I felt it like a sickness around my heart. And its accompaniment was the steady, increasing roll of the Redcoat drums. The Reverend smiled and pointed to Jonas Harrington, who whistled up the tune of Come Swallow Your Bumpers, a song that everyone was singing in Boston and through the country, but no one sang, not even the Reverend. Jonathan Harrington played on alone, but then stopped playing as the Redcoats came marching out of the lifting mist. Then we were silent and we were tight as strings drawn to the snapping point, and my hands hurt as they gripped the gun. Many of the men half raised their guns and bent a little. But we boys looked at each other and licked our lips and tried to smile. And in front of our lines, Jonas Parker, my father, Simon Casper, and the Reverend moved closer together. It is almost here. When the British saw us, they were on the road past Buckman's. First, there were 3 officers on horseback, then 2 flag bearers, one carrying the regimental flag and the other bearing the British colors. Then a corps of 8 drums. Then rank after rank of redcoats stretching back to the road and into the curtain of the mist, and emerging from the mist constantly so that they appeared to be an endless force and an endless number. It was dreamlike and not very believable, and it caused me to turn and look at the houses around the common to see whether all the rest of what we were, our mothers, our sisters, our brothers, and grandparents, were watching the same thing we watched. My impression was that the houses had appeared by magic, for I could only remember looking around in the darkness and seeing nothing where now the houses stood. And the houses were dead and silent, every shutter closed and bolted, every door and storm door closed and barred. Never before had I seen the houses like that, not in the worst cold, not in the worst storms. And the redcoats did not quicken their pace or slow it, but marched up the road with the same even pace up to the edge of the common. And when they were there, one of the officers held up his arm and the drum stopped. The soldiers stopped. The line of soldiers stretching all the way down the road and into the dissipating mist. They were about 150 paces away from us. The 3 officers sat on their horses studying us. The morning air was cold and clean and sharp, and I could see from their faces and the faces of the redcoat soldiers behind them, the black bands of their knapsacks, the glitter of their buckles. Their coats were red as fire, but their light trousers were stained and dirty from the march. Then one of the officers sang out to them, "Fix bayonets!" And all down the line, the bayonets sparkled in the morning sun, and we heard the ring of metal against metal as they were clamped onto the guns. So, why would he ask them to fix bayonets? Well, Here's what I think. And of course, this is not nonfiction, right? This is fiction. But one of the most feared things at this time was the British bayonet. The British army was a well disciplined army. It was not made up of all people from England. There were people from Ireland and Scotland and other commonwealths that were from the empire that was in the army. But the one thing about the army was, boy, it was disciplined. They did not mess around at all. And the one thing that they had as a great advantage was that when they used that bayonet together in unison, all standing together, they were pretty deadly. And they know that the other side doesn't have bayonets. So this is almost to me like an intimidation. They're trying to just intimidate and say, hey, we don't want to fight you dirty farmers. Look at what we got. We got these awesome shiny bayonets. And they're hoping, I think, that they're going to scatter. So one of the officers spurred his horse and, holding it in hard check, cantered onto the common with great style, rode past us and back in a circle to the others. He was smiling, but his smile was a sneer, and I looked then at my father. His face was hard as a rock, hard and gray, with the stubble of morning beard upon it. I touched my own smooth cheeks, and when I glanced at the men near me, found myself amazed by the shadow of beard on their faces. I don't know why I was amazed, but I was. Then another British officer I discovered afterward, that he was called Major Pitcairn, called out orders. Columns right, and then by the left flank, drummers to the rear. The drummers stood still and beat their drums, and the Redcoats marched past them smartly, wheeling and parading across the common, while the three mounted officers spurred over the grass at a sharp canter, straight across our front and then back, reining in their prancing horses to face us. Meanwhile, the Redcoats marched onto the common, and the first company wheeling to face us when it was past our front of 33 men. The second company repeating the exercise until they made a wall of Redcoats across the common, with no more than 30 or 40 paces separating us. Even so close, they were unreal. Only their guns were real, and their glistening bayonets too. And suddenly I realized, and I believe that everyone else around me had realized, that this was not to be an exercise or a parade or an argument, but something undreamed of and unimagined. I think the Reverend was beginning to speak when Major Pitcairn drove down on him so hard that he leapt aside. My father clutched the Reverend's arm to keep him from falling, and wheeling his horse. Major Pitcairn checked the beast so that it pawed at the air and neighed shrilly. The Reverend was speaking again, but no one heard his words or remembered them. The Redcoats were grinning, small, pinched faces under the white wigs. They grinned at us. Leaning over his horse, Major Pitcairn screamed at us. Lay down your arms, you lousy bastards. Disperse, do you hear me? Disperse, you lousy peasant scum. Clear the way, do you hear me? Get off the King's Green. At least those were the words that I seem to remember. Others remembered them differently. But the way he screamed in a strange London accent, with all the motion and excitement, with his horse rearing and kicking at the Reverend and Father, with the drums beating again, and the fixed bayonets glistening in the sunshine, it's a wonder that any of his words remained with us. Yet for all that, this was a point where everything appeared to be happening slowly. Abel Loring clutched his arm and said dryly, Adam, Adam, Adam. He let go of his gun, and it fell to the ground. Pick it up, I said to him, watching Father, who pulled the Reverend into the protection of his body. Jonas Parker turned to us and cried, Steady, steady! Now just hold steady! We still stood in our two lines, our guns butt end to the ground, or held loosely in our hands. Major Pitcairn spurred his horse and raced between the lines. Somewhere away from us, a shot sounded. A redcoat soldier raised his musket, leveled it at father, and fired. My father clutched at his breast, then crumpled to the ground like an empty sack and lay with his face in the grass. I screamed. I was two. One part of me was screaming. Another part of me looked at father and grasped my gun in aching hands. Then the whole British front burst into a roar of sound, of flame and smoke, and our whole world crashed at us and broke into little pieces that fell around our ears, and then came to an end, and the roaring, screaming noise was like the jubilation of the damned. I ran. I was filled with fear, saturated with it, sick with it. Everyone else was running. The boys were running, the men were running, our two lines were gone. Now it was only men and boys running in every direction. That was away from the British, across the common and away from the British. I tripped and fell into the drainage ditch, banged my head hard enough to shake me back to some reality. I pulled myself up, and I saw Samuel Hadley standing above me with a ragged hole in his neck, the blood pouring down his white shirt. We looked at each other. Then he fell dead in the ditch. I vomited convulsively, and then, kneeling there, looked back across the common. The British were advancing at a run through the ragged curtain of smoke. There was nothing to oppose or stop them except for the crumpled figures of the dead. Lying here and there, our militia was gone. The last of them were running toward the edge of the common, except for one man, Jonas Parker, who staggered along holding his belly, his hands soaked red with the blood that dripped right through them. Two redcoat soldiers raced for him, and one who reached him first drove his bayonet with a plunging force into Parker's back. Oh no, I screamed. Oh no, God, no, no, no. Then I saw redcoats coming at a trot on the other side of the ditch, and though my sickness and terror and horror realized somehow that I remained here, I would be trapped. And it was not death I was afraid, or being taken by them, or getting a musket ball, but that thin, glistening bayonet into my vitals, or tearing through my back the way it had Jonas Parker. So I leaped up and ran, still holding onto my gun without ever knowing that I held it. The soldiers saw me and ran to cut me off, but I fled past them across the common, leapt the fence, and ran between two shuttered blind houses and tumbled down behind a pile of split kindling. I crouched there, vomited again, over and over, until my chest and shoulders ached with a convulsive effort of it. Then I ran behind the house and another house, and there was the Harrington smokehouse, and I hid in there, with the hams and the butts and the sides of bacon over me. I crawled into a corner, put my face in my hands, and lay there sobbing. I think I'm going to read another 2 pages, and then we'll move on to current events. At 15, you can still manufacture a fantasy and believe it for at least a few moments. And I had need for such a fantasy, or I would lose my wits and senses completely. So I began to tell myself that none of this had happened, that it was all something I had intervened and dreamed, and that I had never at all awakened during the night, that my father was not dead, and that the others were not dead. I didn't believe any of this fantasy. You must understand. I knew that I was inventing it, but I had to invent it and use it to get hold of myself, and to stop it, and to stop the screaming and the pounding inside of my head. In that way, it worked. I was able to stop my convulsive sobbing and to sit with my back to the smokehouse wall and just cry normally. Once I had established a fantasy about my father being alive, I was able to break it down and argue with myself, then accept the fact that father was dead. He was dead. He had been shot by a musket ball. And if that had not killed him, then a bayonet had been driven into him the way I saw the bayonet driven into, excuse me, my goodness, into Jonas Parker. No one had fallen down on the common and lived. I knew that. We had made a mistake. We were stupid people. We were narrow people. We were provincial people. But over and above everything, we were civilized people, which was the core of everything. We were going to excuse me. We were going to argue with the British and talk to them out of whatever they intended and talk them out of whatever they had intended. We knew we could do that. We were the most reasonable, talkative people in all probabilities that the world had ever seen. And we knew we could win an argument with the British hands down. Why no one on our side had even thought of firing a gun. Because when you came right down to it, we didn't like guns, and we did not believe in them. Yes, we drilled on the common, and we had all sorts of fine notions about it, defending our rights and our liberties. But that didn't change our attitude about guns and killing people. That British Major Pitcairn on his champion horse knew exactly what we were and how we thought. He knew it better than we knew ourselves. And now my father was dead. It was absolute. It was so absolute, it closed over me like a blanket of lead. He would never come home again. He had put his arm around me the night before and had given me such a feeling of love and closeness as I had never known in all my life. But he would not do it again. He was like Samuel Hadley, with the blood pouring out of him, and I began to think of how much blood a man has. And you never know that a man can bleed so much. A red river coming out of him until you see it happening. And then I began to think about Mother. And I asked whether she and Granny and Levi had watched the whole thing from the upstairs windows, how they had felt when they saw it happen. If you could dig the deepest well in the world and call it misery, you could find the place of my feelings then. I sat there and I cried. I hadn't cried so much since I was a small boy, very small, because a boy gets over crying early in a town like ours. Well, we got there, my friends. The American Revolution has begun, and Adam Cooper has seen the first shots of it. In this book, it suggests that the first shot comes from the British side. And I think history itself suggests that we just don't really know. We don't know who really fired the first shot, or whether the shot was ordered. It seems as though what history suggests is that whoever fired the first shot fired out of nervousness. And very likely that it was maybe one of the British. And it may have just been, as the father had warned, an accident. I think that's one of the reasons that Moses goes up and down the line, is he knows that they're outmatched, right? He knows that they're not going to win a battle standing toe to toe with the British. And what he does not want is he does not want it to be their fault that any kind of battle actually begins. He doesn't want it to be an accidental shot that goes off that starts the battle between the colonials, and Adam calls themselves provincials, right? They are people that live in the colonies. They are people that live in the provincial areas of the empire. So in the French and Indian War, the war that precedes the American Revolution, a lot of these men like Jonas Parker served in provincial units. They said, at least at that time, we're Englishmen. We're going to defend these colonies from the French, right? From the heathen Catholics that are up in Canada. They're trying to take land from us. They're trying to take these colonies from us. And where we live is part of that place. The French thought that they controlled Canada all the way down pretty much to Lake George. And then if you push out west, they believe they controlled the Ohio territory. But English people believed, no, we control the Ohio territory, and we control all the territory all the way up through Lake Champlain, up past Fort Ticonderoga. So the state of New York is called the Empire State, right? And why? Well, two great empires, right? The French and English Empire fought over this land because of one specific thing that New York State had that not a lot of other places had, at least not as big as we had it. If you think about Montreal, where Montreal is, and New York City, they are, directly north and south from one another. And what connected those two major cities is a water highway, right? If you wanted to travel from Montreal to Albany, you would travel down the Richelieu River to Lake Champlain. Then you would travel down Lake Champlain to what we call right around Whitehall, I believe is the town today. And then you would jump over to the Hudson River. And then from the Hudson River, you would take that down to Albany or down to New York City. So instead, the other way you'd have to go is you'd have to go all the way out right past Nova Scotia, all the way around the Atlantic, and then back down the eastern seaboard. And you'd be out in the ocean, right? And then you could get to New York City. So this great waterway is one of the things that England and France fought over. And the French and Indian War has always been kind of one of my favorite topics, one of my favorite wars to study. My father and I have traveled up, and actually last year we brought my son up to Fort Ticonderoga, which was built during the French and Indian War. And we have several times gone up to their war college, which is held in May, which I'm getting very worried about. I think that they're going to probably cancel the war college. My dad and I think, went to 10 of them, I think, in a row, maybe 11. Then we had to skip a couple here and there, and then we started going back to them. And the reason we had to take time away is because my youngest son is born in May, and it always seemed like the war college landed on his birthday. So we had to skip it for a while. But now they moved the war college a week earlier, so it's great. We can always go to it, and we've gone up to it for the past few years. So yes, I am a history geek. Okay. So what's happening in the world? Well, I think probably the biggest news, and I've got some really cool news to share with you guys tonight. But probably the biggest news that, and I'm hoping that everybody heard it. And if you have any questions, feel free to throw them in the comments now. I know there's a little bit of a lag, but I'll do my best to hang as late as I can and answer any questions that you guys might have. But President Trump today kind of backtracked the statement that he made earlier in the week. So earlier in the week, he said, well, it looks like we might be on track. And he said, I would like to see the country back in operation by April 12th, right, by Easter. I think he had said something about everybody, he was hoping that people would be in church on April 12th, on Easter Sunday. Well, today, he said, well, it looks like we're going to have to probably keep this up until at least April 30th. So he's had some trouble with his advisors. He's not exactly been on the same page as them. And I don't think he's necessarily lying. I think that in a lot of ways, Donald Trump doesn't really understand politics, and maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. But I think that he is trying to be hopeful. I think he's trying to inspire people. I do think he is playing politics a little bit. He obviously wants people to like him and favor him and vote for him right in November. But when he says these things that just seem out of left field, I'm not really 100% sure where it's coming from. But I want to believe that obviously he's become president. I don't think he's a dumb guy. I don't think he's unintelligent, right? But I just think at times maybe he gets a little bit desperate too, and he throws things out there. I'm not too sure. I don't know. What do you guys think? But anyways, it looks like our national quarantine, at least, and this self-quarantine, social distancing, they're recommending until April 30th. So I would think that it's probably going to be May before I see all of your beautiful faces again. Today, one of the things that the governor brought us up to date on is there are 7,200 new cases in New York. That means we're just under 60,000 total cases. And one of the things that I've been talking to my friends about, and it's one of those things I talked to my dad about it last night, is in some of these other countries, they've gone into some pretty strict quarantines. And I've been seeing more and more on the news, and I've especially seen on social media, a lot of people saying that we need to quarantine New York City. We need to put like a bubble around New York City, and we need to stop people from leaving New York City. And I know that the first case the first case, I believe, in Greene County of the coronavirus was directly, they discovered that it was a direct link between someone that had come up from New York City and brought the coronavirus up. So, I don't know. Does the governor, should the governor say, hey, people in New York City, sorry, you got to stay in New York City? Do we use the National Guard and put do we, use the guard to kind of lock things up? Mystery 1729. Do you think we're going to go into a lockdown type situation like California? Well, I'm not really 100% sure what is happening in California, but I do think that, I've seen on the news, and I think I brought this up Friday night, that a lot of government officials are very concerned that we are not social distancing. We are not doing these recommended things, especially young people are not doing them. The county executive for Albany, Daniel McCoy, or it's either David McCoy or Daniel McCoy. I think it's Daniel McCoy, was called by the police, the Albany police, last night. And the police told him that restaurants are open, right? That the police actually went by and they've seen restaurants where people are sitting down and eating in the restaurants. Well, this is a violation of what the governor has laid out for us, right? He's closed all restaurants. And he said that, restaurants can remain open, but they can remain open only for takeout service. So, if people can't follow social distancing, if people can't truly practice what we have been suggested to do, maybe the government and maybe the governor is going to have to say, well, we're going to have to go into some kind of county by county, quarantine, where if you travel, you can only travel within your quarantine. A friend of mine who works for one of the bigger grocery chains around has now been issued a card, and by the grocery, the parent organization, and said, if you get pulled over, if you're traveling to work, show this card that says, hey, I am an essential worker, right? He is the second in command of this grocery store. He's got a lot of responsibility. And he is an essential worker to be at a place that distributes food. So I don't know. Maybe we're going to get to that point. I don't know. What do you guys think? Should we, or do you think we're going to get to the point where we have to say, like Italy, that's it? You leave your house, like in England. You're leaving your house for food. You're leaving your house to go to the drugstore. That's it. That's where they're at in England right now. So two other things about the state. One other thing, I guess, about the federal government, right? The Fed chair has said that stimulus checks should start hitting people's bank accounts in about 3 weeks. So I guess we're looking at that mid-April point, right? Maybe a little bit later. I think that would put us right around April 18th, 19th, something like that. So, we'll see. Hopefully that will encourage people to spend, right? And we want people to, and I think we talked about this the other night, is the whole spend local thing could be the best thing for us right now. And this is why, right? One of the things that on a state level happened is that the governor has said that no, not, man, hold on, let me get a drink. Let me get a sip of my refreshing diet ginger ale. So the governor today announced that he is suspending all non-essential construction. So what does that mean? If a tree fell on my house and there's a hole in my house, right? There's a hole in the roof. I would need to get that repaired. That is essential. However, if I just said, "Hey, I want to build a new deck on the backyard and or out in the backyard so we can have big barbecues," and I hired a crew to come and do that, a construction crew, that is not essential. So cosmetic things, and things that, like, we're getting to be springtime. Things are kind of nice. Let's get a new coat of paint on the house. Let's get some new siding on the house. All that kind of work is it's done. The governor has stopped it for right now. So that to me is worrisome, right? That is worrisome. One of the great ways to inject and to stimulate an economy is with home building, right? And it's with home buying. And right now, the spring is that time of year where people are starting to look, people are starting to say, okay, yeah, I want to buy my house, I want to sell my house. I want to, when you buy the house, you're going to do this to the house, you're going to do that to the house. When people buy their house, sometimes they'll take out a little extra money so that they can do this, they can do that. And this is the time of the year where that starts to take off, right? So let's think about it. I buy the house. Well, I'm going to hire the plumber to come and do the work. The plumber is going to come and fix whatever it is. Well, the plumber is going to go to the hardware store to buy all those things that he needs or she needs to fix all the work that needs to happen. And the hardware store has to order all the parts, and somebody's got to make all the parts, and so on and so on. So when you have people buying homes and people are doing work on house, right, money really starts to funnel through the economy. Before all this started, I was over at BJ's in Colony, and I drove by the Lowe's over there, and right there were pallets and pallets and thousands of bags of mulch, right? There's tons and tons of bags, thousands of bags and pallets wrapped up of concrete. It's just that time of the year to get these projects going. Well, now we can't, right? Now we can't get those projects going. So when it comes to unemployment and when it comes to the economy, this is something that I'm a little worried about. We want people to start building. We want people to start fixing things. I actually, over April break, I was going to redo the bathroom. I was going to when we bought the house, the one thing we wanted to do, we knew we were going to have to update the bathroom, but we just needed the time and really the money, I guess. Well, not the money, because it's not going to cost a ton of money to do it. But we want to be able to do that stuff, and I'm fortunate because I know how to do a lot of that work. But most people don't. Most people would have to hire somebody. So we'll see what happens with the New York State economy. But I hope that we can get these people back to work, because boy, that money really starts to flow through the economy. So here's something I saw for all of you sewers out there. Joanne Fabric is a national, I believe it's a national chain, might be a regional, but I think it is a national chain fabric store. And as a matter of fact, there might be over by where I was the other day in Northway Mall. I know there's a big fabric store there. But anyways, Joanne Fabric Store is now donating fabric to anybody that will make medical masks, like those surgical masks, to help people, get these masks for to protect themselves. My sons and I actually found right next to me in our workspace, this is our big gaming room, craft room that we're in, is a 3D printer, and we printed a bunch of these bands that nurses and doctors can use for those surgical masks. Because one of the problems that they're having with those surgical masks is that nurses and doctors are not used to wearing them all the time. And what's happening is there's the skin on the top of their ears is breaking and bleeding, and it's raw. So some people have designed these nifty little things that you can use, and you can hook the bands into them so that it's not on your ears. So the boys and I printed a bunch of those up for nurses that we know, and hopefully that'll help them out. So, little things that you can do, but kudos to Joanne Fabrics for donating all that material. One of the things that we have to say, my friends, is that life has to go on, right? We need to keep moving forward. And the state government of Virginia has just passed the Virginia Clean Economy Act. And I'm not going to lie, I'm a little surprised about this. So basically, what the government of Virginia is saying is that by the year 2050, which is okay, it's 30 years away, it's 3 decades away. You guys, right, you're 15, 16, well, no, you're 16, 17, 18 years old. You're going to be my age, right? You're going to be in your mid 40s. And at that time, power companies in Virginia, or anybody that sells power, meaning they sell electricity to Virginians, it has to be all renewable energy. So, how do we get electricity today, right? How do I get this electricity? It's made in power plants. And a lot of those power plants in New York State, we get some from hydroelectric, right? There's a big hydroelectric power plant not that far from me. And so, moving water moves turbines, that creates electricity, we use it. We also have coal-fired plants, right? We take coal, we take oil, we basically do the same thing, right? We use this to turn turbines. The turbines then generate electricity. So what Virginia is saying is that, okay, power companies, you've got 3 decades. As a matter of fact, they don't. They've actually got to have I was reading the article, they've got to have all of the machinery in place by 2045. But by 2050, they've got to have it all online, all up and running. All the power that's going to be created and sold to people, businesses, what have you, in the state of Virginia, all has to be made by renewable energy. So I'm going to say I think that's pretty cool, right? We've got this horrible thing going on. We've got all these problems, that not only the COVID-19 virus, but all the other things that are coming from it. And, Virginia's saying, hey, listen, we got to keep moving forward, right? We've got to do it. We've got to plan for the future. So kudos to them. I hope it's something that New York State adopts. I hope that it's something that in the next few years we take a real serious look at. When you buy your energy from National Grid, right? That's who we have to buy our electricity from in New York State. They do give you the option, right, where you can get part of your electricity comes from renewable wind farms and stuff like that. I think they charge you a little bit more, but what they're saying is, we're gonna take this money and we're gonna invest it, and we're gonna try to get more of these types of energy, renewable energy sources, to get the electricity that we need. There are some countries in the world, my friends, that are way ahead of us on this, right? They are way, way ahead, whether it's solar or wind or wave or geothermal, right? There are a lot of countries that are light years ahead of America when it comes to renewable energy. So, we got to play a little bit of catch up, but it's something that we have to do, right? It's not a, well, maybe we'll do it one day. It's, we have to do it. And I personally would rather be at the forefront of this than play catch up, right? Um, I bought a home that has a corn stove. And I don't know if I've talked to you guys about this in class, right? So basically, what happens is I get dried corn. It looks like your popping corn that you would make popcorn with at home, but it's a lot bigger. The kernels are bigger. And so what they do is they dry it to basically take about, I think it's 93% of the moisture out of the corn. So then you take the corn, you put it inside the stove in this big hopper, and then as you start a fire, and what happens is the corn trickles down on the fire, and um, that's what heats your home. And I'll tell you what, our first winter, and I know this wasn't a bad winter, but we spent maybe about $1,000 in corn, about $1,000 to heat our home through the winter. And I got to tell you, I think that's pretty awesome. We do have oil for our hot water, but we don't spend a lot of money. And oil is our backup heat. If anything ever happens to the corn stove, then we can always turn on oil heat to heat the house. But I wanted to buy a home where I wasn't going to be spending thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars in oil. And I think altogether, like I said, I spent about $1,000 in corn. And in the almost year that we've bought the house, we've only spent about $700, maybe $750 in oil. So I'll take that, right? I'll take that. I know people who spend $4,000 or $5,000 alone in just oil, just for winter, right? And then they're still using other sources to heat their water and do other things. So I don't know. That's something that's important to me, and hopefully one day that's something that you think about when you're buying your first home. So I also heard this really cool story today out of Maryland. Two teenagers, Matt Casertano, and I'm sorry, I know I'm going to butcher this other young man's name, Durav, Duruv, maybe Dhruv, Duruv Pai, Pai. Both of them have elderly grandparents. And where they live, a lot of these elderly people have self quarantined. They are remaining and doing their due diligence to socially distance. And these two young men have organized teenagers, right? People that not are really in the big risk group, but, or risk pool, I guess you could say. Excuse me. But they are going out and they're grocery shopping for people. And guess what? You know how much they're getting paid to do it? They're not getting paid anything, right? They're saying, here are people in our community that need help. So what they've organized is this way to get get the information from the people that need food, that need their prescriptions or need whatever. And they've come up with this whole process. I wasn't going to write it down, but I thought it's really cool. Like, they all wear gloves. They all have like different protective clothing on. And when they go and they do the shopping, they wipe down the bags and they do this and they do that. So there's like such a small percentage chance that even if they came in contact with anybody that has the COVID-19, that they're just not going to spread it. And I think what they do is like they leave it on the doorstep for the people. Then when they go away, the people come out and get the food or the prescriptions or whatever they need. And so, it really, I guess it just kind of warms my heart when I hear that people like that are young people are doing those types of things. I think volunteerism is not a cool thing. It used to be. I think that it was something that even when I was a teenager, If somebody said, hey, would you, my mom, hey, go help, the lady next door, she's bringing in her groceries. Oh, okay, whatever, right? um, but I don't think that's like such a big cool thing anymore. And my sons, my entire life, I have really tried to teach them the importance of volunteering and helping other people. It really is a great thing, and I think that they're 13 and 16, and when somebody needs help, they don't wait. They don't wait for me to say, hey, go help. They do it. And that makes me a proud dad, and I think that's something that during this time, we're starting to see more and more people that are stepping up and volunteering. And I know what I've heard a lot of people talk about in class is they say, well, there people are just doing that to get attention. They don't really care. They're doing it because they want people to say, oh, they're a good person. I don't know. Maybe they are, but I'd like to think that they aren't. I'd like to think that they're saying, I see a need to need someone that is in need of help. And the little bit of effort that it's going to take me to do whatever that thing is would be a incredible amount of effort and energy for that other person to do it. So why not take a little bit of time and do it? I really think volunteerism is something that makes and the opportunities for volunteerism. I think that's one of the things about our country that is just so awesome, because there are so many opportunities. And I wish there was a way to get more young people involved. I've worked with some great volunteer organizations, and I try to encourage students to young people to volunteer. And that's one of the great things that I love about scouts, is that scouting is 25% of being a scout is being a volunteer. So again, I think that we're going to learn something about ourselves through all this. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think a lot of people are. I've seen a lot of funny memes out there. One of the memes that I saw was, like three people, like a mom, dad, and a son, and they're all sitting around texting, and it said something like, social interaction before COVID-19, and then down below on the bottom half of the meme, they're out walking, right? You see a ton of people out walking together, and it said social interaction during the quarantine, right? So I think it is starting to. I'm hoping that this is starting to get people to appreciate. Get outside, man. Don't sit on your butt. And it's nice. It's a beautiful day out there. Get out there. I was really upset. I've talked to you guys about, I think it's important for all of us to exercise our mind and body through all this. And every day this week, I've really tried to get outside. I've been walking a couple miles, and I've been trying to really push myself and, do it as fast as I can, get a nice exercise going. Today it was just pouring out, right? I don't know about there, but in the Berg, it was pouring out. So I kind of felt like, crap, I couldn't get out today. I just couldn't stretch my legs. So I'm really hoping that tomorrow it's going to be a little bit nicer, but I guess tomorrow we're going to get more rain. And then Tuesday we might get some snow. So much for spring. But I do think a lot of people are appreciating uh, or learning to appreciate a little bit more, that being outside is a good thing for us. I bumped into one of my scout parents the other day, and I was asking her how she was doing. She has a very big family. I believe they have 8 children, and one of her oldest children live out in Syracuse, and it was her birthday. So what they did was, is they a bunch of them got in the car, and they actually drove to Syracuse, and they drove to her house, and she came out on the porch, and they all sat in the car and they waved to her and they sang happy birthday, but they weren't allowed to give her a hug. They weren't allowed to go inside and spend any time with her. And they stayed there for a couple minutes and just kind of talked and did that. And then they got right back on the road and they came back, to Middleburg, about a little over a 2-hour drive. And the one thing that kind of shocked me, she had four, I think she said it was her and her husband and four little ones in their vehicle, and all the rest stops are closed. And a lot of places are closed. So when you're traveling with four kids and you can't just pull into a rest stop and dump them all out and let them use the bathroom, boy, that's a tough ride, right? That's a real tough ride for parents. So anyways, we are making it. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. It looks like it's going to probably be another month, right? It's probably going to be another 4 weeks or so. But it looks like things are in some ways getting to be where they need to be. I know, like in Albany, the Times Union Center is being set up for the National Guard to deploy. The Javits Center and the other big convention center, and it's either in the Bronx, I think it's in the Bronx, is now ready to go, or they're just about to come online to start accepting all these patients. It looks like we're getting more ventilators, more tests are coming into the country. The CDC has now said that anybody that needs a test, we're going to pay for it. And apparently a lot of our big healthcare companies are now saying, we are going to pick up the tab if your hospital stay goes outside of what your plan would normally provide for you. Some of these bigger companies are saying, don't worry about it. We're going to pick up the tab. So it's nice to see that we're starting together. I hope that we stay together. I hope that after the coronavirus that we don't forget how we came together and we keep it rolling. But we'll see what happens. So I'm going to say goodnight. Thank you, everybody, for reading with me tonight. We are more than halfway through the book. I think we got to, let's see, where are we? We're at 105. So we are more than halfway through the book. The American Revolution has begun. I'm hoping by Friday we're done. I think by Friday we're done. And, if you missed any of the nights and, you want to tell anybody if they missed any of the nights, you can just go to the channel and catch up on the book. We're getting there. And the book I think we're going to read next is The Jungle, which is a book about the meatpacking industry in Chicago. So thanks again for joining me, guys. I miss you all. I hope to see you soon. Be well and be safe.